So you have no time to learn about this. And we were the same way. But when we married, my spouse had already known about how to invest in mutual funds, and she got a lot of good advice from her dad. And so I thought, well, that makes a lot of sense. I'll call my dad and find out how to invest. And he said, well, I go to this Business Week magazine and I look up the annual mutual fund issue, and anything that's got at least 2 up arrows, buy that.
2 up arrows.
That's
a good one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Business Week is barely hanging on today.
I know.
But that's how we did the first 10 years.
Welcome to the Deals and Aloha podcast, where we talk about financial independence, hope to leave an impact on our audience, and of course, spread aloha.
Gee.
You can find us on Instagram and all social media platforms at Kamohai and Tristyn. Please like, subscribe, share
Follow
this podcast so we can impact even way more lives. And let's go.
Let's go. So today we have Doug Nordmann from, he's an avid blogger, author, financial independence guy, right?
That's it. That's exactly right.
And you can basically find him as the military financial independence author, blogger, website, all the things. So I'm excited to hear about your story because you have been doing this for a long time.
I'm experienced, yes.
So the first question we like to ask is, how did you get into real estate and financial independence, and what has been your journey thus far?
Yeah, what's your story?
I started my military career in the early 1980s, and my spouse also was active duty, so we were one of those early dual military active duty couples from the 80s and 90s. And I don't know if you've read up on the history of real estate, but back then, real estate always went up. And what you were supposed to do was buy a house at every duty station you were at. And then when you retired 20 years later, maybe 30 years later, now you have 5 or 6 rental properties scattered all over America.
Yeah.
And you're independently wealthy. You're financially independent.
Yeah.
And life is good. And so as we started accumulating savings from our paychecks, it's difficult to save early in your military career, but when you're in the Navy on sea duty and you're spending 60-70% of your time underway, in my case underwater, then you do save some money. And so we bought a house at one duty station and then sold it so that we had enough money to buy the other house at the other duty station, and actually made some money in California in the late 1980s. And then when we sold that house, we were stationed in Hawaii. And when we got to Hawaii, we were looking around at rentals, and you know the story. Everybody looks at a rental and you're not happy. And I had actually taken some leave and came to Pearl Harbor and looked all over the island in 1989 and finally found a ran down rental property in Waipio Gentry. And we bought it. And, you know, we were scratching under the sofa cushions for quarters, and we had to run around to the ATM at the day of closing because Hawaii's banking laws did not play well with mainland banks at the time.
Yeah.
Right.
And we were homeowners. And so we learned very quickly sweat equity and home improvement. And we stayed in that house for 5 years. The Navy had other plans and sent us to San Diego. We came back as soon as we could. And then in 2000, you remember perhaps the real estate recession between 1991 and the year 2000. We'd started looking around. The Waipio Gentry schools are great, part of the Pearl City High School system, but it's a long drive from Waipio Gentry to the top of Pearl City, up on
Right.
Home Road.
Yeah.
So we were looking around, looked up at Mililani and many other places, and found another house, a second house in horrible condition up in Mililani, and we bought that, and that's where we lived for 23 years.
Wow.
And in the year 2000, you didn't want to sell a house that you owned because the one we had bought in 1989 was, in 11 years later, worth less than the money we had paid
Wow.
all the way back in 89 before we had put the
And you
money
don't
into
really
it.
hear that in Hawaii.
It's hopefully it's a once in a century issue.
Right.
I don't know if you remember
Hopefully.
the decade-long recession. Over 2/3 of the island's realtors surrendered their licenses because they didn't want to keep paying money for it.
No, I was way too young when that happened. Real estate wasn't even on the forefront.
You didn't miss a thing. Man. It's like every
I'm glad I
day
didn't.
this can't
Jeez.
possibly get worse.
Dude, I can't imagine a
That's
house,
wild.
you owning a house for 11 years and it was worth less money.
We bought
in Hawaii.
We bought at 277.
Yeah.
We put about $50,000 into it over the next year, and in 1990 it had gone up to 425. And then by 1999, 2000, it was down at 240.
Wow.
That's wild.
Crazy.
It's funny now, but
It's
and it
funny.
looks
Well,
pretty
what is it
smart
worth now?
That's right, right. 1.5, and now we look like we're brilliant. But
Right.
over the long term, it's
Yeah.
only appreciated at about the rate of inflation. And as a rental property, its cap rate, and you hear this a lot, I'm sure
Yeah.
here, 2 to 3%. And I look pretty smart when interest rates are 1 to 2%, and we're getting 3%. Yay!
Right.
But right now, 2 to 3% cap rate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not good.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
And so we're still keeping it for family reasons. And one of the family reasons is my spouse, she's got 52% of the vote, likes home improvement and enjoys the security of having rental property. And it's diversification.
Totally.
100%.
And we've got great tenants. When we have good tenants, life is good.
Yeah.
And when we don't,
Life is
we look for
horrendous.
good- right.
But I mean, you guys ended up keeping. You made the decision at that time to hold on to the property. Was it
Yes.
really even an option for
No.
you guys to get rid of it? Okay.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we could have sold and paid, another $20,000 or $30,000 in closing costs and commissions to a realtor, because back then you just weren't going to put up a for sale by owner sign.
Right.
And then we would have written all of that off and started over. But it turned out in 2000, when we found the house in Mililani that we bought, we were both still active duty at the time. And we'd gotten some promotions. We were both 04s, Navy lieutenant commanders. We went to Navy Federal Credit Union and said, we have this house, but we found this other house. And apparently they weren't writing that many mortgages anyhow. And they were really happy to let us leverage that thing at 90%.
Oh, wow.
And there's a comfort factor that you have to become accustomed to with leveraging a 90% loan in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
And then
Right.
moving out of your perfectly good house into a rundown, decrepit property that you got at a substantial discount, but still had to get in there. And now you've got to get one property ready for tenants, get the other property ready for some kind of human habitation. I won't say that we were living in poverty, but it was pretty rough. And we're in
Yeah.
the middle of a home improvement scene for probably the next 2-3 years.
Wow.
It all worked out. A lot of labor, a lot
Yeah.
of late nights, a lot of weekends.
Sweat equity.
For
Sweat equity.
sure.
Yeah.
If I had to condense all of our real estate experiences, all our positive achievements into 2 words, it would be sweat equity.
Yeah.
And thank goodness for the Navy submarine force for everything I've learned about plumbing and sewage and electricity.
Wow.
Yeah, there
so
you
you
go.
had some.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that is cool. So, I mean, I do know that real estate is a small piece, right, of
Yes.
what you do. So, I
Yes.
mean, I guess my question so you got into the military. What drove you to want to figure out like what another way is? I think we're oftentimes programmed to run in a certain direction.
Good word.
What was it for you that had you searching for more? Where did that journey start?
Early on, when you join the military, you sign a certain obligation. Maybe it's 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, depending on who you join and what skills you're given. And eventually you decide you need to get out. And maybe it's going to be right at that transition point where you could re-enlist or sign up for another obligation. Or maybe you've started a family and you've figured out that you're worth more as a civilian than you are as a military service member.
Right.
But you want to get out and you need a transition fund. And so initially, our motivation was saving a transition fund. That worked great for the first 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And you're getting paid fairly well after that initial 5-year obligation as an officer. Get a couple of promotions. And then at the 10-year point, right when you've got another transition because you've got 10 years in, you're probably 30 years old at the peak of your earnings potential. Maybe you want to get out, but gosh, it's only 10 more years to that 20-year and that pension.
Right.
Yeah.
And in our case, it was starting a family. And as soon as our baby was born, I wanted to spend more time watching her grow up, catch every milestone, be there. And I wasn't being unreasonable. I thought nights and weekends would be a pretty good deal. But unfortunately, I was working on shore duty at the time, too, at a staff where I was expected to work nights and weekends as well as during the day.
Yeah.
And so that time conflict and the personality conflicts behind it was what drove me to realize there's got to be a better way.
Yeah.
And so the rental property that we had at the time and the change in properties, all of that was looking for a better school system, looking for a better arrangement for our family, but also mostly because we were waiting for the economy to come out of the real estate recession.
Right.
Here on Oahu was the biggest
Yeah.
problem, right?
Yeah.
And so as that was working through, we were continuing to save, continuing to invest, continuing to build our assets. And in the late 1990s, again, high savings rate, a lot of sweat equity, living a very simple, frugal life because you're parenting.
Yeah.
You're not going away to Maui every other weekend.
Right. Right.
And eventually we reached financial independence. Now, also the fact that we were both earning an income, we were both investing up to 40, 50% of our pay because we were saving up for that transition fund,
Right.
saving up to get out and take care of our family. And in 1999, by investing aggressively and working on houses with sweat equity, we reached financial independence. And I don't know, back in 1999, late 1999, everybody was financially independent for about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And then after that, we found the house that we live in now in the year 2000. And then we did actually start some transitions and start looking at the next stage of our lives.
Yeah.
I retired in 2002, June of 2002. So
Okay.
it's been just over 21 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned investing several times. What does that look like? What other asset classes are you investing in other than real estate that contributed to you and your family being financially independent?
Equities. And that's the short answer.
Yeah.
What we did was invest. Initially, we built up an emergency fund like everybody does. And then we invested in 100% equities. And in the 1980s and 1990s, it was equity mutual funds. Back then, I've got a whole blog post that talks about all the mistakes you make on your route to financial independence.
Yeah.
And the theme is that a high savings rate, that 40 to 50%, that'll get you to financial independence within 20 years, maybe a little less. And you can make a ton of mistakes, and that high savings rate will still overcome most of those kinds of mistakes. And in the 1980s and 90s, it was active management and mutual funds, chasing the hot fund manager every year. You would open up Business Week and look for the guy that's got 3 up arrows. He's really good. And they were all he's, right?
Yeah.
But you look for all the people that are chasing the best performance. Back in the 80s, you paid a 2% sales charge because you couldn't afford that massive 3% sales charge for Fidelity's Magellan fund.
Right.
And then you paid expense ratios of like 1.5%, 2%. This was normal.
Totally normal.
And we did all that in the 80s and 90s. And it wasn't until as we were approaching retirement, as I was getting ready for retirement, that we started looking into what we were paying, because we were aware by early 2000, 2001 that there were other ways to invest: exchange traded funds instead of mutual funds,
Right.
or index funds instead of active funds, and passive management. When we became aware of that and started looking into it and started moving things around.
So for somebody that all of that just went straight over their head, that they're just
Sorry,
no,
yes.
it's this is great, but I'm just trying to think of the audience, and if they're trying to figure out how to invest, what they should be investing in. What is a mutual fund? Like, how can you describe it to somebody that literally they're learning for the first time?
I've got 2 pieces of advice. The first one is to track your spending so that
Okay.
you know where the money's going.
Okay.
When we're in our early 20s, late teens, most of the time we have a paycheck and we have no idea what happened.
And it's
Where,
gone.
where'd it go?
Where to
Yep.
go? Oh my gosh, it's 4 days to the next paycheck.
Yeah.
And then tracking your spending after a couple of months. And by tracking, I mean however works for you. Your
Right.
phone, a tablet, whatever is something you're likely to keep up with will work. We're not trying to turn this into a rigid, disciple, disciplined way of living.
Like crazy
Yeah.
system you can't upkeep.
We're not trying to make you angry about budgeting, about tracking your spending. None of that. It's like a New Year's resolution. You're not going to go to the gym and work out for 3 hours.
Right.
But if you track your spending, that'll take maybe a minute or 2 a day to write down or record your activities. And now you've got an idea where the money's going.
Right.
3 or 4 months later, you're going to look at that. Where did all that money go? And now you know. And so you
See
can,
exactly
Yeah.
where it went.
I sure hope so.
Yeah.
I guarantee you there's a pattern.
Exactly. And it might involve a lot of alcohol, or so I've heard. But the whole point is that you can look at that and decide what part of this is a waste of my time, a waste of my money, a waste of my life. What would I wish I would like to cut out? Just cut out the waste. And again, I'm not here to tell you how to live your life, how to run your budget, how to run your finance. Just cut out the waste.
Yep.
You get to decide what the waste is. And now suddenly you're paying off your credit card debt. And in the military, you probably bought a hot pickup truck or a hot car. And now you're paying off that 19% interest loan. Eventually, you dig yourself out of debt, and now you're starting to put some more money into your savings and checking accounts and
Yeah.
building up that emergency fund. Now, if you're in the military, I would tell you to put your money in the thrift savings plan, and that's essentially mutual funds that are index funds. You don't have to get involved in that. What you have to know when you're on active duty in the military or even in the reserves or guard today is that if you put money into your thrift savings plan, at least 5% of your base pay, you get a 5% match from the Department of Defense. That's the free money that you care about. And now let's say that you've got that under control and you want to invest more. You want to have a Roth IRA. And so you're going to open that account. And again, mutual funds, exchange traded funds, cryptocurrency, real estate.
Yep.
It's all out there. A mutual fund is just a collection of different stocks or different bonds that you would invest in because you wanted to own some stocks or bonds.
Yeah.
If you've got an income and if you're actually saving money, you probably are going to be employed for a few more years. You've probably saved up an emergency fund to make sure that if you get laid off, you at least can pay for your living expenses and your bills. So maybe it makes sense to have a high equity asset allocation. And I tell people, pick an asset allocation, and there's two things to do. One, you can do all the math and logic you want. And unfortunately, I work with a lot of people who are oriented toward math
Analytical.
and logic.
Yeah.
Hyper, maybe even anal retentive. A submariner here.
Yeah.
But if you gravitate toward that, that's great. You still got to be comfortable with your asset allocation. So if your asset allocation, you do all the math and logic and say, wow, I'm going to invest 100% stocks. And then tomorrow the stock market drops 10%. How do you feel about that?
Right.
You can do the math and logic and you can see the numbers, but how does that make you, or more
Yeah.
importantly, if you're married, how does that make your spouse feel?
Right.
Right.
And if you're staying awake at night, trying to sleep because you've invested too aggressively and the volatility is upsetting you, then you back away from that
Right.
aggressive asset allocation. Now, in the case of my spouse and myself, we were both working. We knew both of us had a pretty good reliability of employment. One of us could get out and the other one would still be working. So to us, it made sense to invest 100% in mutual funds, stock mutual funds.
Yeah.
So
Right.
you would look up a mutual fund back then in a 1980s magazine at the public library and see that it owned a lot of stocks and it was 98% stocks. Today, I'd tell people also, if you want to learn more about this, that you can go read a book by an author named J.L. Collins.
Okay.
Okay.
The book is The Simple Path to Wealth. And in there, he talks about buying mutual funds from Vanguard, which is one of the leaders.
Heard
Yep.
of Vanguard.
Yep.
There's a
Yep.
couple of leaders out there. Vanguard's one of the better leaders. And just keep buying mutual funds as much as you can, whenever you can. You've got an asset allocation, and whenever you have spare cash to throw into that, go ahead and do it. And he takes out a lot of the hype, a lot of the confusion, and a lot of the angst and uncertainty.
He just
out of
simplifies
investing.
it,
Exactly.
which is exactly what
He's-
I feel like we need as human beings in general.
Simple.
Just
the
make
older
it
I,
simple.
The older I get, the simpler I want.
Yeah.
And he writes it. He's sold over 100,000 copies in over a dozen languages, so he must be onto something.
Yeah.
But it's very reassuring as an entry-level investor to start with something like that. And he's got it all in his blog. The irony is he's published a best-selling book with 100,000 copies, and it's all free
In his
right
blog.
there
Blog.
on a blog, and it's called The Stock Series.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And,
That is
and he,
super
he
cool.
wrote The Stock Series on his blog initially because he tried to teach his 4-year-old daughter
4-year-old daughter.
how to invest.
Wow.
And it went about as well as you would expect.
Yeah.
So that blog post, the series of blog posts, the book, that was an apology essentially to his daughter, who's doing perfectly fine today as an adult.
Wow.
And she's probably mostly over it.
Yeah. That's
yeah.
hilarious.
That's crazy.
That's so funny.
So, I mean, you're on your journey. Obviously,
Right.
you've tried a lot of different things. Were you just figuring this stuff out? Were you like involved in any kind of education, or did a lot of this?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Did a
How
lot
did
of
you
this just
learn?
come from
No.
reading, or
Yeah.
what? Where did that start?
In the 80s, when my spouse and I married, I realized I needed to learn how to invest. And I hadn't had any time to do that because I was too busy learning how to do my job,
Right.
going to sea. You didn't
Which
have
a lot of people are in that situation.
Everybody is in that
exactly.
situation. You just finished school, whether that's high school or college or a trade. You're learning your trade. You're hoping not to get fired. You're
Yeah.
spending money and wondering where it went. And if it's gotten even further ahead of you and even further out of control, you're married and starting a family, hopefully in that order.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And so you have no time to learn about this. And we were the same way. But when we married, my spouse had already known about how to invest in mutual funds, and she got a lot of good advice from her dad. And so I thought, well, that makes a lot of sense. I'll call my dad and find out how to invest. And he said, well, I go to this Business Week magazine and I look up the annual mutual fund issue, and anything that's got at least 2 up arrows, buy that.
2 up arrows.
2
That's
up
a
arrows,
good
yes,
one.
yes.
Yeah.
Business Week is barely hanging on today.
I know.
But that's how we did the first 10 years. And then in the 90s, we started investing even more aggressively because the World Wide Web was up and running, and everybody knew that was the future.
Yeah.
All these old school blue chip big corporations, they were going to go away any day now. And so as we were reading, and again, it was reading mostly magazines that were financial magazines, maybe an occasional book or two, but it would just be tangential.
Yeah.
So today, it's all out there on the internet, and there's way too much of it, which is
it's almost,
it's overwhelming.
Yes.
And that's why I suggest the stock series or the Simple Path to Wealth is a great way to start. It's like a gateway drug to deciding if you're the kind of person who wants to spend all your time learning about this, or whether you would just like to put your money somewhere knowing that it's going to grow for retirement, and you can come back in 15 or 20 years and appreciate compounding.
Yeah.
So there's very little education as you have
What we know
known
now.
over and over and over from your podcasts.
Well,
Yeah.
today we have access to information more than ever before.
And more of it.
And yes, and that makes it an amazing thing if you're interested in learning about something,
Yep.
but at the same time it can be a double-edged sword, right? Because access is so accessible
And free.
and free, anybody can put anything on the internet, and you have to really, like, how do you know which source is actually credible, what information is valid? So it can be, like you said, overwhelming. So
Very quickly.
yeah.
Yeah, I think too, for humans, when there's so many different options, it becomes very difficult to decide which one I should go.
Yeah.
Where should I go?
The paradox of choice. The more you
Exactly.
have, the more frozen you are.
100%.
Paralysis by analysis.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
And we see that in the real estate industry a lot.
But there's all this data out there. And you
It's-
can do it by zip code, and you
Yeah.
can get each block in the entire country.
I know.
I
There's
know.
got to
I
be
know.
one perfect investment out there on some city in America.
So I have a couple of questions for you. How did you know that you were financially independent and could live off of your choices of investments that you made? Like, at what point did you know I'm going to be just fine?
In the late 1990s, we had piled up the investments aggressively, compounding. We had years in the stock market where it would go up 20, 25, even 30%.
Wow.
Right. Well, this is the new normal.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
At
Now.
some point, you look at your investments and say, my investments made more last month than I did.
Yeah.
And it's like having a third person working in your household, maybe somebody who's better paid than you are. And so you begin to look at this and say, well, why am I working so hard? And if I'm transitioning out of the military, do I really need to go get another job? And again, I give credit to my father for this. I mean, we talked about the Business Week incident in the 1980s, but years later in the late 1990s, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do after the military. I knew I would hit 20 in 2002, and that would be a clean break. I knew I was going to retire. And I took all these self-assessment surveys and exams, and you can just spend days
Yeah.
working through all.
Who am I? What am I good
What
at?
am I good at? What are my soft skills?
Yeah. What are my strengths?
And I found out I was going to be a great middle-level manager or a wonderful nuclear engineer, which is because you're in a nuclear submarine force.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Geez, I've spent 20 years of my life, and this is what it comes down to. And I was griping to my father about this. Hey, I don't want to retire and immediately have to go to work at a nuclear utility or in some middle-level manager job.
Right.
And he gave me that look. You remember an old TV show called That 70s Show with
Yes.
a character in it
Yep.
named Red Foreman, and he would look at his son
Red,
and he would
yeah.
say, now we can edit this one out, but he'd say, you dumbass.
Yeah.
Not getting edited out.
My father wasn't quite Red Foreman, but he still gave me that look and said, you've been in the Navy for a while. Have you saved any money? I said, well, yes, quite a bit.
Of course. Yeah, of course.
Actually, I
Well,
have.
Yeah.
So why would you want to work? And giving you permission to not work is not the culture I was raised in. And
Or-
he had to do a little breaking out of his own comfort zone to stop working when he did. And it was the same thing he was passing on to me, as little as I appreciated that at the time.
Yeah.
So in the late 1990s, the magazines were just beginning to talk about something called the 4% safe withdrawal rate. And one study was by a guy in 1994 named Bill Bengen, who said the safe maximum withdrawal rate, the safe max, is about 4.5%. He's done computer studies, and this is what he's concluded. And then there were three people you've never heard of and will never recognize their names ever again, but they worked at Trinity University, and so they called it the Trinity Study. They did this in 1998, and they came up with not just about the same conclusion, but they said if you have a lot of stocks, if you're invested in a high equity portfolio, your success rate is even higher than if you were to invest in half bonds and half stocks or a lot of bonds. And so now we have these two studies, and again, we're getting this information in magazines. It's a computer study. There's a lot of data, a lot of charts.
Yeah.
The liberal arts audience is not really happy with what they're reading, but the engineers are all over this.
Yeah.
And
Right.
they're really excited. And at the time, that was going to become conventional wisdom, but it's like finding a miracle cure for cancer. How long do you have to wait to find out that maybe it doesn't work out as well as everybody initially thought? And this is where we were in the late 1990s. These two things show you that if you can withdraw 4% of your investments at the very beginning of your financial independence and just raise that once a year for inflation, that's the 4% safe withdrawal rate, you'll probably survive on that for at least 30 years.
Yeah.
And if you're in your 30s when you do that, even if that's a miserable failure at the end of the 30 years, now you're old enough for Social Security.
Right.
So your total failure is, I didn't work for 30 years. I did whatever I wanted. I owned as many longboards as I could find. And now I'm on Social Security
Right.
and figuring out what other part-time work I want to do to build my finances back up. That was the state of the art back in the late 1990s. And so when we got to the 4% safe withdrawal rate, if you do the math on 4%, that's assets of 25 times your annual spending. And you've been tracking your spending because you
Right,
want to reach
'cause-
financial independence. So
Right.
when you get that magic 25 number, you're probably going to be okay.
Yeah.
Now, we're all human beings. Now, somebody else has done the math and the logic for us this time. Thank goodness. But we immediately focus on everything in that has led to any failure. You've reached 25 times your annual spending and you know about this 4% safe withdrawal rate, but if there was ever any data run in any of that study where it failed, that's immediately our focus. I want to avoid failure. I don't
Right.
want a 90% success rate with my financial independence. I want 100. I want 102%.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that leads into a temptation of what we've learned to call just one more year.
Yeah.
You've heard this?
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
going to work for just
Okay.
one more
One more
year.
year.
Just
A
one
little more margin.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I want to travel. I got to send my kids to college. I want to buy a boat.
Right.
And so that just one more year, and it works great. If you hit that 25 times threshold, then you're probably going to be okay. But if you work one more year, then you're definitely going to be okay. And eventually you're going to go from financially independent to overly funded financially independent to what we joke about is fat fire.
Fat fire.
Fat fire. And that can keep on as much as you want.
Right.
However, you know how much money you have and you know how much it's going to cost and you know how likely it is to last for at least 30 years, maybe even longer. You don't know how much life you have left.
Right.
You can make some predictions and some pretty good guesses and still find out you're horribly wrong.
Yeah.
And so you're in a situation where you're working longer for money that you probably do not need, and you're trading your life energy for that money,
Yeah.
and you don't know how much life energy you have left. Now, when I say it'll probably work out all right, many of the parameters of the study that led to these failures were parameters that were just too hard to simulate. Like you earn a little money after you retire, or you spend a little more money one year and then cut back on your spending in another year, right? Variable spending techniques. And those are the things that are very hard to simulate in computer studies. So when you tell somebody there's this thing called the 4% safe withdrawal rate, they say, oh yeah, I heard about a failure in that. You say, yes, but there are many other things you can do to avoid that failure. Well, I want to have an extra thing in my life. I
Right.
want to travel first class. Now you get in that debate about margin, one more year. I would like to tell you that if you have saved up to, say, 25 times your annual spending, and you have that, and you know you can earn a little, and you have all these things in your favor, I would like to tell you that you would be confident in your ability to go on your financial independence and enjoy your life. And ironically, at all income levels, there's that same emotional concern.
Yeah.
I don't mean that just somebody who managed to earn $1 million in savings and investment from their $75,000 a year job or their $50,000 a year job, and they work for 20 or 30 years. It's not just those people that are concerned about having to make that money last for the rest of their lives. I know people, mostly online, but some I've met in person, with 7-8 figures of net worth. $5 million, you could spend quite a bit of money every year for that, right? You could spend $200,000 a year if you had a $5 million portfolio by the 4% safe withdrawal rate. And yet they want a little more margin. They're not really sure. $6 million.
It's never enough. It's never enough.
Well, if you're working and you're challenged and fulfilled by your work, then just keep going.
Keep doing it.
Yeah.
Like there are occupations where you never have any reason to retire. Doctors, lawyers, college professors. If you feel like you're having fun, and real estate investors. And you know people who are continuing to do it long after they're earning Social Security, long after they needed more money. They just enjoy.
I just talked to a woman yesterday at our meetup that said that she thoroughly enjoys and loves her job. And she's older in age, you know, and she literally has no plans of stopping, and she just thoroughly enjoys her job.
And I would say do more of that.
Yeah.
As long as you're having fun, as long as it's challenging and fulfilling. And at that point, the 4% safe withdrawal rate kind of becomes irrelevant. Now you're into estate planning, charity, philanthropy, gifting your important people in your family, that kind of thing.
Right. So what would you say for the person that says the stock market is too volatile for me? What would you say to that person?
I'd agree with them. It is. It's too volatile for anybody.
Yeah.
I would say that I've been through several recessions by now.
Right.
And when you're looking back in history books, you say, okay, the market went down by 40%. Oh, I can handle that. I got a question here. It says right here, I can handle 40% dip in the stock market. But when you have to look at that every day, and every morning you wake up and you say, it can't possibly get any worse. And it does. And you say, well, okay, it's done that 10 days in a row. Day 12 has got to be better. And it's not. And it goes on for 2 years. That is all about the emotions of what has become the field of behavioral financial psychology. And what it says is that at the absolute best time to invest in that recession, in that bear market, that is when you are most likely to cash out and run away screaming. Even though that, in retrospect, was the best time to put all your money into the stock market.
Right.
And so if the stock market's too volatile, that's an indication that you're investing in assets that are too volatile. And so if you're investing in a 100% equity portfolio and you're not happy, back off a little bit. And by back off, I mean 80% stocks, 70%,
Reallocate.
even 60%.
Yeah.
And invest in bonds if you want. I can't make the claim anymore that bonds are going to perform anywhere, right? That's not the point. The point of bonds is to reduce volatility.
Yeah.
Even if they're still losing you money, they're going to lose your money less quickly than stocks.
There you go.
I'm trying to put a rosy picture on this.
But
that's the whole point of bonds, is to reduce volatility. Now, the other things will reduce volatility just fine, like a treasury fund that you buy from Vanguard. You know, look for a fund that has named treasuries in it, or I-bonds. You know, there are funds that sell I-bonds, or you can buy your own I-bonds from the treasury. Now, those are bonds, but they track inflation, and they are unlikely to lose money if the stock market is losing money. We've seen too many scenarios happen that we designed these securities to not have happen to them that have happened anyway. But if you find that stocks are too volatile, then back off, bring in more bonds, bring in cash, bring in real estate, right? I mean, you can invest in a real estate investment trust, a mutual fund, or you can go out there and say, well, I give up on a stock market. I'm going to keep getting my match from my employer and my 401k, but all my other money is going to go to investment rental properties where I can find the property, have some control over it, screen the tenants, do the flip, whatever is your niche in real estate, you have much more control over that. And any volatility, now it's your fault.
Now it's on you. It's in your control, right? It's not happening to you.
You can learn a lot more from it.
Right.
I also will say that if you do start investing aggressively and you go through a recession, it hurts. You can't not make it hurt. But The second recession that comes along, it hurts a little less. And the third one, you're feeling pretty good.
Yeah.
And the pandemic recession was my fourth time. My daughter and my son-in-law had just given birth to our grandchild, and so we were a little distracted at that moment, but we never even really noticed that recession. We were too busy grandparenting,
Right.
sleep-deprived all over again in a good way, but we had enough.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we knew that we had been through recessions before and would survive this one, and son of a gun, we did.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right.
That's cool.
So you retired from the military in 2002.
Mm-hmm.
What happened next?
You get a little pushback. I mean, my father showed me the way, helped me ask the questions. We were financially independent. We had, after 9/11, we had enough. And after 9/11, we knew we had enough money. Even though the stock market had dropped, we still had 25.0001 times our annual spending.
Right.
Frankly, at that point, we were more worried about not being able to retire. The military was doing what was called stop loss. We were getting ready to go to war.
Right.
People
I
were finding
remember.
out there being. I actually, one of my supervisors came in and said, "Hey, if you wanted to stick around for another year or two, we can make it happen." And I was like, "I don't really want to." And,
Yeah.
"Well, what if we make it happen anyway?" And I was like,
Yeah.
"I really don't want that."
Yeah.
But those are the other concerns that override the recession, the war. All that was overriding the fact that we were able to retire.
Right.
But we decided to do it anyway. Now, the idea was that I would retire, we would spend a few months with family, get some naps, recover from chronic fatigue, spend
Yeah.
some time with family,
Right.
Right.
and then think about next steps. Plan B would be I could always go back and get a job. And at the time, I did not appreciate those soft skills and that I could get a job in something other than nuclear engineering. But I knew that I could eventually get a job, even if it was just going to go up with the joke was to be a greeter at Walmart. That's where you find the old
Right.
retirees, right?
Right.
Right.
So I knew that was available. And that was the attitude that we entered into my retirement from active duty. So you get some pushback because everybody who's on active duty with you knows that you can't possibly make enough money in the military to reach financial independence. Yes, you can. And that you can't possibly stop working because you'll be so bored and unfulfilled. Not going to happen. You can't find something to do all day. Yes, you can. And on and on and on. And,
Yeah.
and those legends, those urban legends are difficult to break through when you're on active duty, when you're surrounded by an
Yeah.
environment that does not
Every-
believe you can do that.
Right.
totally.
It's hard. So how did you push through that?
I was stubborn about it and obstinate, but I was also burned out. And I knew that I could retire, spend that time with family, and eventually, if I wanted to, go back and find another job. Now, at the same time, my spouse had left active duty. She had gotten that unrefusable offer, and she had gone into the reserves. And so from active duty full-time to 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, that
Yep.
was a much better lifestyle. I should have done that in the early 90s myself. But when she did that, our quality of life immediately got a little bit better, a little easier. And I mean, I'm not saying it was easy, but it was
Right.
less hard.
It was better. Yeah.
And so we knew that she would have some income coming in if she needed to go back on active duty. She could make that happen. I would feel that I would need to haul my own part of the load if she was going back on active
Right.
duty, but we were willing to work that out.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
knew that we had human capital, the ability
Yeah.
to go out and earn some money to get through that.
Yep.
Now, about 2002, after I recovered some from chronic fatigue and
yep.
got some bandwidth back and got some cognition back, I was able to look at our investments and say, well, we're paying these tremendously high expense ratios on mutual funds. They were low in the 80s, but now in 2002, 2003, they're very high.
Yeah.
And we started buying exchange traded funds and mutual funds that had lower expense ratios, and that all worked out very well. And everybody goes through this. You stop working, no more paychecks, and you immediately go back through all of your spending,
Yeah.
all of it.
Yeah.
And some of it you deliberately cut out because you've decided this is also waste. Sometimes you call up your insurance company, your utilities, your subscriptions, and you negotiate. You're a retiree. You're home all day.
Yeah.
You don't drive your car as much. You can keep an eye on your house. So you renegotiate your spending and you cut back in those areas. And all of these things are a type of vigilance over making sure that you're spending about what you want to budget and about as fast as you want to go while watching that 4% safe withdrawal rate. And one day you realize you're having a wonderful life. Right? I found plenty of things I wanted to do. I actually went back on the internet to a forum in 2004, almost 2 years after retirement, and
Okay.
said, this is too easy.
Yeah.
What am I missing? The money's
Should I
there.
be doing
Yeah.
something?
I can't possibly be having as much fun as this. All my background experience has taught me that there's going to be
Something's going to
It's
happen.
problem.
Supposed to be harder.
Something's
Yeah.
this
gonna
has
happen.
got to be harder.
Right. Yeah.
And the response from that forum from many people in their 50s and 60s who had been retired for 2, 5, 10 years was like, no, if you're having fun, keep on going. And so I started spending more and more time on that forum and eventually got into writing about financial independence.
Yeah, that's a good segue. I was going to ask, how did that come to fruition? How did you start blogging and writing? You're on your third book, you said, right?
Right. I've got to revise the first book before I start working on a third book. But yes, this is going to take a while.
Yeah.
But the point is that I was on this forum, the same forum, and on there we were
What forum
watching.
was that?
It's called earlyretirement.org.
Okay.
Nice.
Early with a hyphen retirement.org.
Okay.
It's still around.
Oh, nice.
I was there in the early days, and it's grown quite a bit since then. That forum had an author on there who was writing another book. It became known as Work Less, Live More. Great title.
Well, no way. That is an awesome title.
Yeah, I like that.
He had sold a pitch to a publisher. Now, when you sell a pitch to a publisher, you tell the publisher, I'm going to write this New York Times bestseller. Here's a 1-paragraph summary, and here's a sample chapter. What do you think? And they're like, we love it. When can you have the book?
Yeah.
And so he was writing the book as he was posting about it on earlier time. We were watching the manuscript. We were watching the
You
sausage.
were watching it
You're
happen.
watching it happen.
As and questions kept coming up. And one of the questions I remember was back at the time, this seemed like a reasonable question to ask, but the question was, what would happen in a world if everybody pursued financial independence? Nobody would spend any money anymore, and the economy would implode, and then all stocks would go to zero. Or what happens if everybody reaches retirement age and they sell their stocks and they buy bonds because they're retirees? Now the stock market's going to crash. He had to answer these questions in this
Wow.
manuscript.
Okay. That's
He was not
interesting.
happy.
I'm
yeah, he was
sure.
not happy at all.
This was the editor asking the questions, not his readers. But while we were sitting there, we had another 40 or 50 people in the forum who were military veterans, and another 25 or 30 who were actually on active duty or new people that were in the military. And we started pointing out that we had some of these problems already solved. If you retired from the military, you would have an inflation-adjusted pension, so you're keeping up with inflation in your pension income. If you retire, you have cheap health care. And by cheap health care, I mean really cheap.
Real cheap,
Like
yeah.
$20 a month cheap for health insurance. And so where are all the military retirees who reached financial independence? How come there aren't more of these people?
Right.
And we started talking about it on that forum. And at some point, we had a bunch of stuff in there and a bunch of discussions and threads. And so I said, we should write a book just like Bob is writing this Work Less, Live More book. And I said, yeah, that sounds like fun. I think I can do that. And
Yeah.
I spent 5 years doing it, but eventually the military guide came out.
Love that.
So cool.
And then years later, I mean, that was 2010 that the editing process began. It was published in 2011. Totally old school publishing. I would never do that again. Don't tell my publisher.
Yeah. No.
But the next book came about because I started getting questions about how to raise your kids for financial independence. And the attitude was, we all know everything there is to know now about financial independence. The study came out 15 years ago. We've all read it on the internet. We all understand that stuff, but my teenagers are frustrating me with their understanding of financial literacy, and I want to teach them more.
Yeah.
And I started getting these questions at meetups and at small conferences.
Yeah.
And they'd ask me right there on the stage, and I'd stand there and say, well, you could try this. And I was babbling. I really didn't have good answers. At that point, our daughter had graduated from college. She was working for the Navy. She joined the Navy. She learned nothing from her parents. She's heard this before. But she was on sea duty, and she also had married another naval officer. And so the two of them, dual military, right?
Yep.
And that glamorous lifestyle. And we were at their house one night and having dinner together. And I said, Carol, I got that question again at this last meetup about how to raise your kids for financial independence. And I said, I've been babbling for, the last 3 or 4 times I've got these questions. I really don't have any idea because I'm the parent. And I mean, I know what we did, but frankly, we were making up stuff. At
Yeah.
some
Totally.
points because you're tired, your kid is 3 years old in your face, and you're just going to try something. And if it works, thank goodness you're going to do more of it.
Right.
Exactly.
That's you can't write a book like that.
No.
Right.
You can, but not if people are not gonna buy it.
Nobody's going to read it. Yeah.
So I said, Carol, what did we do for you that you remember? And she lit up.
Really?
And it made, in retrospect, it was just like J.L. Collins's teaching his daughter about the stock market was us teaching our daughter about financial independence. But she lit up in a good way. And she had many good she had some that were not so good, but she had many good memories. And so she started talking. And I'm like, well, what about this? What about that? And she's talking and talking, talking. And I look over at my wife and I'm like, this is awesome. And
We
she's,
did something right.
and she's like, you better be typing.
Yeah, you need to get this all
Take
down.
notes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
take notes.
At that point, our daughter had decided that she's just about done with her Navy career. And the next day she was at the Navy's transition seminar where you sit in the back of the room and they pretty much tell you how to get a job out of the Navy. And she was writing the outline and the stories and the chapter. And she
the
came
book?
back with like 2.5 chapters at the end of that week.
Wow.
So now I'm in catch-up mode. I mean,
Yeah.
I know how to get an editor. I know how to get a book publisher. I know how to get the big project going. But I'm scrambling to keep up with this person who's writing twice as fast as I am, essentially.
Wow.
So we
that's
wrote a
cool.
book together.
So
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. And
I
that's
love that.
that's been out for 3 years now.
Well, it's amazing you don't realize how much your children are watching what you do.
When you're in the parenting process, no.
Yeah.
But after they've left the nest, or
Yeah.
even worse, when you're a grandparent,
It's amazing. You know, because we have young children right now. We have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old.
5-year-old.
oh, they're still listening to you then.
Yeah.
Very,
They
very,
still-
very
They
much.
still love us and want to be with us all the time. And I know there's going to be
Enjoy
a
it while it
point.
lasts.
Yeah.
There's going to be a point where
Getting there.
they
Yeah.
want to go hang out with their friends and
Yep.
you know what I mean?
But
So-
they're definitely listening to the conversations that we have about money and the energy that we bring into those types of conversations. So I think it's important as entrepreneurs and real estate investors to be aware of that and like pay attention to that, because your children are picking up everything with your relationship to money and financial freedom and how you view the world right now.
They can either be inspired or they can be scarred for life.
Exactly.
And then you don't know which one it's going to be until they get older and can communicate back with you about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen Mindy Jensen talk about this on the Bigger Pockets podcast, but she says that her daughters hate to drywall because they've done so much of it
because they've done so
as
much.
teenagers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's those
Yeah.
inside corners that really annoy them. And that whole point is that if you make that your life at home, that your kids will absorb some of that. But as they grow older and get a bigger social network, they'll
Right.
talk to their friends at school and find out what their lives are like.
Yes.
Right.
Now, in general, our daughter was able to compare her life to other people's lives, and there were things that were found lacking in our house,
Of course.
but she generally enjoyed it and felt
Yeah.
like she had a pretty good deal.
Yeah, totally. Well, that's cool. So I'm wondering how much of the once you've reached the financial independence, you're on this journey and you decide to write about it, right? You find it on this forum. You decide to start. I don't know if is it more education, or you're like you wanted to share this knowledge with people, or was like, you know what, I really enjoy this. I have all this time now.
I have this information.
This is what I want to do. You know what I mean?
First thing that happens is you write the book with your friends on a forum, and you've committed to finishing the manuscript, and now you got to sell it. And eventually, a publisher takes your offer and agrees to publish the book. But the first thing all new authors learn is that they are totally in charge of the marketing.
Yeah.
Publishers will tell you that they will help.
Right.
I think that's how they get you to sign the contract in the first place. But the reality is you are doing all the marketing. You are directly responsible for the efforts that lead to more sales of your book. And it's just like sales in general. You've heard about people in the sales business complain about wasting their advertising dollars. And they know
Yep.
they waste half of their dollars. They just wish they could figure out which half is wasted.
Yeah.
And as a published author, you're marketing your book, but you really can't tell what you did today that leads to that book sale tomorrow. Instead, it seems more like random lightning strikes. And so when you publish that book, you have to market it. And the first thing you do is you start a blog. That's what everybody did in 2010 was start a blog.
Got it.
And a Facebook profile. Right?
Okay.
Yeah. So I started a blog. I could figure out WordPress and get that going. I had my daughter show me how to start my Facebook account. And
Yeah.
she did a wonderful job. But she declined to hire on as a virtual assistant.
Yeah.
And between those, you pretty much market the book however you are comfortable with. Now, there's a bunch of books out there that will tell you how you should, and a bunch of videos that tell you how you should, and a bunch of blogs that tell you how you should market your publication. But you essentially you find something that makes you feel comfortable, that fits the lifestyle and the personality you are, and that's what you do. And for me, over the years, I've learned that just answering questions on forums is what I gravitate toward. And the questions that are asked on those forums that I get to answer, I get better. I get to practice.
Yep.
Right.
I hope I'm helping. I
Yeah.
think I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I get better at answering the question every time. I see more edge cases than I ever would have expected to find in my own research or in my own life. And more importantly, by answering questions on a forum for free, which is very time intensive,
Yeah.
you also build credibility and people feel that they can trust that.
Right.
And at that point, everything that's in the books we've written is also on the blogs, but people either want to say thank you or they want to have their own copy to highlight the margins. Even if it's an ebook, they'll still highlight it.
Right.
Or if your blog vaporizes overnight, they still want to have something to hold that they can look at that has that information in there.
Yeah.
My chains of command, the people that I worked for when I was on active duty, are very annoyed with me today because they say I did a very good job of hiding that writing skill when I was
When you
They're
were
like,
in
we
the
could have
military.
used
when
you.
I needed. Right,
Yeah.
we could have used your abilities back then. How come you didn't use those for good?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's so now your audience, you say, is it mostly military?
Yeah.
Is that what your
Most
audience
of,
is
most
now?
of the audience is military. Now, there's some
Yeah.
forums out there that are fairly large groups,
Mm-hmm.
and one of them is a conference, an annual conference called FinCon.
I've
Oh,
heard
heard of that.
FinCon.
You've heard of it? It's
I
working.
have
Okay,
heard of
good
FinCon.
marketing.
Yeah,
I'll tell
yeah.
them.
Yeah.
But the whole point is that the tagline is where money and media meet. That's the official tagline.
Okay.
The unofficial tagline is money, nerds, unite. And
Okay.
it certainly is.
Yeah.
And I'm
yeah.
well known in there because I've gone to 11 of them.
Mm.
And so by peer tutoring and some mentoring,
Yeah.
you eventually broaden your contact network and get to meet more people. There are vendors out there, publishers, and other people that you can
Right,
work with. And
right,
so
right.
FinCon is one way to spread the word. I also have many smaller meetups in personal finance that are not related to the military. Little groups like Choose FI, Bigger Pockets. I don't know if you've heard of CampFI.
Yeah.
Yep.
A lot of real estate investors in CampFI.
Yes.
There are.
We all sit there and trade all the latest ideas and
Love that.
challenges
Super cool.
and figure things out. And so again, you build up your contact network and talk with people. Now, many of them are also in the military, or they're veterans, or they have family that was in the military, and so they understand. I've been doing this long enough now that I'm starting to hear from the next generation saying, "Hey, Grandpa's got some problems, and he was a Marine, and we think that they can give him some benefits. What do I do?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm also getting questions from parents who say, "My 18-year-old just joined the Air Force, yay! Tell me how they should be investing."
Right.
But I can answer that question. So-
Right.
Yeah,
totally.
And we all know that 18-year-old is way too busy to actually figure that out for themselves. But if mom or dad are able to step in and help, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what has been your biggest success, I would say, in your financial independence journey thus far?
Wow, that's a very big picture. I think the biggest success I've had is getting comfortable with the 4% safe withdrawal rate, with being around it long enough to know all the little issues that can arise with the studies and all the ways that you can work around it and the ways you can lead a very happy life.
Right.
And so the 4% safe withdrawal rate and all those years of experience, that to me is a tremendous personal success because it's removed all the angst, all the
Yeah.
concern, all the emotions of
Yeah.
behavioral financial psychology. So that's a non visible success, right? I'm
Yeah,
not saying
that's-
it's
I
invisible.
love
I'm saying
that.
it's intangible. You can't look at that and say that's
yeah.
my. I don't
Yeah.
get a participation award for that.
Yeah.
No, but it's a big deal.
Yes,
It's a huge deal.
The other thing that happens is that after 20 years of this, compounding has worked its magic. It's been going up, and it looked like it was linear, even though it was exponential.
Love that.
And about the year 20 point, it hits the corner and starts compounding exponentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So,
so-
can you say for somebody that doesn't know what compound interest is,
Right?
what is it?
You're investing your money in something that's paying you back, even if it's a cap rate of 6% in an investment rental property, or if it's the stock market in a stock that pays a 3% dividend and grows roughly 5 to 10% beyond that every year. All of that is getting interest on your money, just like interest on your checking account.
Right.
And essentially, the more risk you take, the more compounding you should get.
Right.
Right.
We have problems figuring that out, a lot of problems, but that's the idea.
Yeah.
And that compound interest actually grows exponentially. I say exponentially because the interest you earned last year is now growing from the interest you're earning this year,
Yeah.
and that continues. And that's why after you've been saving money and investing it for about 10 years, you start to say, I have investment returns that are a substantial amount of my salary. Why am I working?
Right.
And after a while, a 15-year point, you realize that your investments are now growing faster than your salary.
Right.
And again, why are you working? Those are all
Right.
very good questions.
Right.
And that's growing fairly linearly. As humans, we can't estimate exponential growth. Our brains don't do it. We look at something and say linear. I can do linear.
Yeah,
and
that
we
makes
do
sense.
linear. Well, linear is easy to do, but it's also the way exponential starts is linear. So you're watching that linear compounding, not anticipating what's coming. That's right, and it looks pretty straightforward in retrospect. But one day you wake up and say, I've had investment returns that are 3 times what I ever got when I was earning money for an employee.
You kind of just got to be able to trust the process, right?
It's impossible to trust the process,
It's
right? The
impossible.
emotions of behavioral you can do math and logic. I can do math and logic, but the emotions will derail that every time.
Every time, I'm sure.
And
I'm sure.
even in your 50s and 60s, you'll find people who are saying, work sucks, I got to stop. And I say, well, how much money do you have? And we'll do the math and we'll say, you've got 50 times your annual spending. You will never run out of money.
You
Yeah.
are going to
You're
be
okay.
okay. You can stop working.
And then it's, but, and it's not just travel. It's not just kids in college. It's, I might need that for medical expenses and health insurance. I might need that for long-term care. And so it continues and it
Right.
doesn't get any better, even though you've got and so I'm turning into that guy. I'm 62 years old. I will be 63 years old in a couple of months. I am that guy who is saying you need to have an estate plan. You need to have a philanthropy plan. You need to have a gifting plan. You need to start spending down this money. And if you have any kind of pension income, even if it's not inflation adjusted, if you have any kind of annuitized, reliable income, like, maybe rental properties,
Yeah.
you probably are going to have to start giving it away faster, younger, sooner, and spending it down. Just because it is going to compound. And when you're in your 80s, you might be getting tired of landlording. You might be outsourcing to a property manager. But that exponential compounding is going to grow the money faster than you. If you don't mind paying estate taxes on your assets after you're gone, that's not a problem.
Right.
Right.
But on the other hand, wouldn't it be nice to share that money with your favorite charities, gift your family, help improve the lives of others? You're going to do that after you're dead. Wouldn't it be nice to peel off some of that now
Now.
while we're all still around
Yeah.
to
Right.
enjoy it
And
together,
you-
while we
yeah.
can talk about it? That's the idea. Again, it's a big leap in faith.
Right.
We have military pensions, my spouse and I, and we are pretty confident that that's going to continue, and we can do the math of the exponential compounding. And so we have started accelerating the gifting. So at that point in your life, you've got to look at philanthropy, gifting, maybe even a spend it down plan. And again, I'm going through this in my 60s, and I'm happy to share those kinds of details with people that are also facing those decisions.
through it.
But the whole idea is to get the fun out of it now while you're all still around to do it together. And I've also found, and my daughter's heard this many times before, but I found that her understanding that her parents have a plan and that they have given her the right legal permissions and the understanding of our investments, and there's no surprises. And if she needs to step up, if we're in a horrible surfing accident and now we're in
Right.
a hospital with a coma, she can step up. She can do what she needs to do to take care of our finances, to take care of us, without having to untangle this horrible spaghetti ball of
Yeah.
things that she never knew.
Totally.
I've seen my parents have to go through that with my grandparents, so
Right.
I understand exactly what you're talking about.
Everybody has that story.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
nobody talks
everybody
about
has
it
that
until
story.
until somebody breaks down crying and talks about it. And
Right.
Yeah.
Everybody has that story.
And it's a
Yeah.
blessing to be able to pass on things, from generation to generation. But if there's ambiguity or you don't know what you don't know, it can add this layer of very intense stress.
And we don't talk about money.
Yeah.
And we don't talk about money. That is very common. And
It's so rude.
why?
It is so rude. Right.
Why?
I think we're uncomfortable about it. Yeah, ironically, in a capitalist society, we're uncomfortable talking about our own
So
finances and
ironic.
our own money.
And like where we stand.
We'll talk about religion, politics, and sex
But
much
money
more than we
is
will
off
talk
the
about our money.
table.
And some of that is based in a lack of financial literacy.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it is just because we don't understand the assets, we don't understand the conversations, and we're surrounded by people that are gurus who seem to have all the secret codes that we don't understand and all the secret techniques that we'll never learn. So we don't feel comfortable talking about it just because we're afraid we don't understand it. We don't
Right.
know enough. We're missing out.
Like, is it a fear of looking ignorant or something versus
I'm
just
long past that.
yeah,
but it is.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Versus just being like, I actually
That
have no
ship
idea.
has sailed, but it is a fear of making a horrible mistake with your finances.
Yeah.
What if you cash out your 401k to go buy that indexed universal life insurance annuity policy that very nice insurance salesman can sell you that says
Right.
is going to outperform the stock market? You don't know.
Yeah.
If we did talk about this more when we were all being raised, then that would be much easier, right? But again,
Yeah.
everybody has a money story. Some of them are good. Many of them are not so
Not
good, and we
good.
don't feel confident
Right.
talking about it.
I mean, I think I hope one of the goals or things that this podcast can allow people to achieve is to talk about money.
Well, yeah, more normalize it. You know,
yeah,
we were
you know.
talking
Exactly.
offline about how it's very common. We don't learn about money. We don't learn about financial literacy when we're growing up.
Well,
and
basic principles aren't even taught in school.
in our Hawaiian culture, it's even more so you don't talk about money.
Right?
Very,
Exactly.
very. And when I was growing up, it wasn't talked about at all. Frowned upon most times. You know,
But
especially
we're still talking about taking care of the Aina. We're still talking about our kuleana. We're still talking about Ohana. Why don't we talk about the resources?
Yes.
100%.
But the thing is, those two things go hand in hand,
yeah.
but
Yep.
only one side is discussed. This is very interesting.
Well, it is, and we have like a very you don't want to boast, right? Especially in the Hawaiian culture. So it's like
humble brag.
You want to
yeah,
be
you know what I
humble,
mean?
yeah.
It's like,
Yep.
so if you're talking about that or what you have, like you're coming across as, you know, you're better than me kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So I know it's just a lot.
and it's interesting to see that emphasis on the native Hawaiian culture. And then traveling the world, and you begin to realize that it's not just the native Hawaiian
not.
culture; it's everybody's.
It's
everybody's
everybody.
culture. It is.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now it's cultural. It comes from ancestry and how you got to where you are today. But everybody's in all those different cultures.
Same.
Not
So it's
talking about
actually
money.
just a human condition.
I'm afraid so. And that gets right back to those emotions, the behavioral financial psychology that will derail all the financial literacy. Think about, you talk about, we don't teach that in the schools. Now, if you're 15 years old and you're sitting in a class, a mandatory class that you have to pass to talk about balancing a checkbook
Right.
or investing in cryptocurrency or how to set up a mutual fund account or how to set up your Roth IRA, are you really ready to hear that?
Yeah, I don't know.
They're going to plant a seed, maybe.
Maybe.
But at 15, that age, if you're like me, you have too much else going on in your head and you're not ready to listen.
Yeah.
And I see that all the time in a young military audience, people in their late teens, early 20s. Again, I tell them, go get qualified. Don't listen. Don't try to take notes today. You've got the notes that you need. You can come back to this later. Make sure you're investing in your 401k for the free money from the Department of Defense. But otherwise, go get qualified. Don't worry about all the other details.
Yeah.
And then when you're 25, 30 years old, maybe when you started a family and you suddenly realize you have to start adulting, read that piece of paper I'm giving you today or look me up and we'll talk.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
when you're ready.
I don't know. I still feel like exposure early on might have positive effects, and maybe make
could.
adulting
It could.
easier, or make allow for kids to at least mature a little bit in that area. I don't know.
Even if it's just a conversation that you hear every week around the dinner table without emotions or anger or fear,
Right.
Yeah.
it becomes normal to talk about money.
You know, it
right?
becomes
right.
basic knowledge versus out in the universe. I have no idea what they're talking about. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I 100%
Yeah.
agree.
So to wrap this up, I asked you what your biggest success was or your biggest triumph. What now on the flip side of that, what has been your biggest challenge you've had to overcome in this lifelong pursuit of financial independence?
It's mostly been pushing back against what you're expected to do in society. And this was, I joke about how in the 80s and 1980s and 90s, we were doing this with clay tablets, wooden styluses, and smoke signals and abacuses.
Yeah.
Right.
And so today it should be so much easier.
Yeah.
And it is not. If anything, the amount of information out there makes it even more difficult because of all the choices. So back then, I was pushing back against the culture of work until your mid-60s, get that pension, start your Social Security, and then you can retire.
Right.
You'll probably die in 5 years because you're burned out, but you'll have a good 5 years left.
Yeah.
My spouse and I have a whole bunch of life goals that revolve around not collecting paychecks.
Yeah.
But the whole point is that today, all of those pieces of information out there that are just as confusing as before have also given us many more choices. And having to push back against society financially for financial independence, for carving your own path has gotten much easier now. Some would say it's gotten too complex with so many choices. I would say that it's good to have choices.
I
The
agree.
difficulty is filtering through the choices you have.
Filtering through the
Yep.
choices.
Yes. Different kind of challenge, much better challenge.
I think we can relate to you on that sense for sure, because we're kind of pushing back against what we were told and what we were taught, and
Right.
you know what I mean, and what society tells you need to do. Even when we were first starting in our real estate career, all the feedback we got was, no, go get a job, go get your 401k, and then do real estate on the side.
A big
Yeah.
pile of money.
It's
You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's a good hobby to have, but it can't be a main thing.
I'll point
You can't
out
do
that, I'll point out that by being entrepreneurs, you're getting rid of that 40-hour-a-week job working for the man, and now you're working 80 hours a week for
For
yourself.
yourself, yes.
And that's a common misconception that a lot of people have, right? With
Luckily, there are
this.
two of you, so you can work 160 hours a week.
There we go. Yeah.
until
We
you
shorten
learn
that timeline.
until you learn a different skill set of how to actually run a business and delegate tasks.
Delegation is the key.
Yeah.
You would think the military service members, the veterans, would be all over that.
I know.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
crazy.
But if you could go back to the beginning, what would you have done differently, if anything at all?
I've heard this question before, and I will start by saying that if the person I am today had gone back 40 years to younger me in my early 20s and started handing out these golden nuggets of life advice, that I would have immediately called security or the police and run away, probably carrying my six-pack of beer under my arm, and ignored all of it.
Yeah.
But if I was starting over, I would be investing in a 401k to make sure I got the match. I would be putting money aside for an emergency fund. I would be putting money in a Roth IRA. And I would be doing that because I had tracked my expenses. I
Right.
had cut out the waste, and I had started saving and investing.
Right.
Again, you don't have to have a high savings rate to reach financial independence. But if you do, you have a lot more under your control, and you can do a lot more stupid stuff along the way, and that high savings rate will still make up for it.
Right.
Yeah. Love that.
What would you say, and this is like totally off, I should have asked this earlier, but
Oh, I don't want to study. I'll take this one as it flies by.
what is a good, you keep saying emergency savings, what is a good amount? What should people be striving for in this emergency savings? How
all-
much? You know what I mean?
We've all heard 3 to 6 months of expenses.
Right.
Yes,
and
we
that's
have.
because we are all worried about losing our jobs. But if you're in the military, you're probably not going to lose your job. And
Right.
if you are going to lose your job, they're probably going to give you more than 6 months warning. So I tell service members, active duty families, that you probably don't need a big emergency fund. You probably only need a month or two of not your salary, but of your expenses. And if you're unemployed, you're not going to be going to an expensive Disney resort.
Right.
So
right,
you're going
right.
to cut your spending to the bone.
Yeah.
And that's what you want, is that 1 month of paying my bills
so
on a
that I
survival
can find
basis
something else.
while I'm all over LinkedIn networking
Right.
and finding a job or whatever my next step in life is.
Right.
And I'll go beyond that and say that if you're not in the military, if you're in a traditional corporate career, I have no idea.
Yeah.
3 to 6 months, sure,
Love
whatever.
that answer.
How long does it
Love
take you to
that
find
answer.
a job in your career? But I'll give one more advice. I know many, many entrepreneurs. They're either freelancing or they are building their own real estate portfolio. And for those people, I would say 1 to 2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you don't have 1 to 2 years of bare bones expenses saved up, then you're going to be stressing over getting your business started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're
I
going to be
agree with
stressing
that.
over getting the cash flow.
I agree with
And
that.
finding that sweat equity jewel, diamond in the rough,
Right.
that you're going to turn into $1 million property.
Yeah.
And the problem with that isn't a financial problem. The problem is that the stress of that, the emotions
I
of
don't
the
know what to do
behavioral
about it.
financial psychology.
I agree with finding that
Well,
sweat
how did-
equity jewel diamond.
Excellent. Thank you, Siri.
Thank you. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you
Siri.
for being the next host.
She's not feeding me my line. So
She's
this is,
I
too
know, this is
smart
so
for her own
crazy.
good, this girl.
Jeez.
but that stress is going to make you make compromises, make decisions that in retrospect will be poor decisions. It might make you actually tempted to sell out, to take that freelancing job that you really don't want to take, to work for somebody else in the real estate industry that you really would rather not work for until you've got that career going.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
1 to 2 years if you're going to go take that entrepreneurial lifestyle. Am I far off the mark on that?
No,
You've got more
not
experience in
at
this
all.
than I do. So
Not
I
at all.
100%
I
agree.
think that's very
Yeah.
sound advice.
this is what I hear from everybody else that's running their entrepreneurial
yeah,
lives.
it's not 3 to 6 months. Save for like 2 years.
Well,
Just build it.
if it's going to work, it's going to work in less than 2 years.
100%.
And so at month number 25, if it's not working, you need to
You
You
need
need to
pivot.
reevaluate.
You
Yeah.
need to pivot. Hard, big
So
and fast.
let me ask you this: what's next? What's next for you?
Well,
Like,
my
what-
first book's been out for 12 years.
Awesome.
I've been saying that for 5 years. I should really revise that. And it's evergreen. It's not. I'm not saying this because the publisher wants to sell that last pallet of books out of the warehouse. I'm saying this because it's evergreen advice, but things have changed in the military.
Yeah.
Different investment plans, different pension plans, different career plans. So I need to. I should
Update it.
acknowledge at least the existence of the Space Force and reach out to those people, plus all the other things that happened in the last decade.
Okay.
Yeah.
The next thing I want to do is write the third book, Living Your Financial Independence.
Love that.
And that is going to start with you have reached that tripwire of assets of 25 times your expenses.
Yep.
Now what?
Now
Yeah.
what?
And
yes.
I'm practicing. We talk about posting on internet forums as research. That's an author term. And I've been researching for quite a while. But I actually went to a meetup where we sat down and thought this out. We actually did a brainstorming session at this financial meetup where we came up with a whole bunch of questions, a whole bunch of ideas. And I've been going back to that outline and answering questions. It's starting to come together. Now, this
Yeah.
is no help at all for actually publishing a book, but it's starting to come together. There's an outline. There's 50 pages of streams of consciousness
Right.
Yeah.
for that third book.
Yeah.
Cool.
I
The
love
thing
that.
the thing that happens if you do this long enough is that you become allergic to deadlines.
Allergic.
I don't know. I'm still allergic to deadlines.
I know.
You know, if it's a mortgage payment, that's a problem. If it's a contractor timeline, that's a problem.
Yeah.
But if you're writing books and you're not depending on royalties for grocery money, then you don't have to have a deadline.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Last question is, what impact do you hope to leave with the audience?
I used to joke about passing the torch. I used to talk about paying it forward and doing the favor for the next generation for all the favors that were done to me when I was too young and stubborn really to listen to that advice. But at least I can transfer that information to somebody, to the next generation, plant a seed and wait until it's ready to be fertilized and grown. And that expression about passing the torch was intended to say that one day somebody else is going to pick this up and move it along. I'm not focusing on my daughter on this. I'm just saying that was the first example where
Right.
I encountered passing
Yeah.
the torch. But it's turned out the better analogy is lighting a bonfire. I don't
like it.
need to hand that torch off to somebody else. I just need to touch it to the edge of that bonfire and stand back.
Yeah.
And that's what I really enjoy doing, is finding as many people as want to learn more and take that to a new level. Maybe we'll come out with a better, more improved study that incorporates all these computer problems that we couldn't get the first time around. But I
Yeah.
want people to feel comfortable
Right.
with reaching that tripwire and then designing the next stage of their life
Yeah.
and having confidence that they will succeed.
I love that.
Yeah. So cool.
Where can people find you?
Well,
Do you want to be found? That's the question.
Yes, yes. If you're on Oahu, I get together probably every month, sometimes 2 or 3 times a month with
Okay.
people who want to get a cup of coffee.
Awesome.
But I'm at Military Financial Independence.
Okay.
And my email address, I think I gave that to Nico.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes.
Show
Yeah.
note, put my email address in the show notes.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm on Facebook, and I'm in all the military Facebook groups and
Okay.
On Twitter.
Okay.
Military guy.
Love that.
Yeah,
Well,
man.
this has been fun.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good.
so
All right.
Yeah.
much. This was super fun.
Yeah.
So,
All right. That's all she wrote.
all right, Nico. We'll see you guys later.
Thank you.